Mr. Johnson declined to bring up with President Macron the issue of so-called migrants. They were too busy doing jokes about the size of their jets and who's got the biggest fuselage, and regrettably time ran out. So there was not a word about all those, quote, asylum seekers fleeing France in terror to come and live in the UK for the 10 or 20 years it takes their applications to be processed. Fortunately, the High Court of England has found time to say a word about it. Priti Patel has been housing, quote, asylum seekers at the abandoned Napier Barracks in Folkestone, just temporarily, you understand. The Home Secretary unilaterally extended that use of Napier Barracks until 2026. And the court has now struck that down as a breach of the Equalities Act. Napier Barracks, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, is, of course, named after General Sir Charles Napier, one of the most culturally confident men in our history. Coming across some Indian villagers preparing for sutti, that's the burning of a widow upon the funeral pyre of her husband, he was told that it was their tradition to burn widows. General Napier responded that it was his tradition to hang chaps who did that sort of thing, so they could follow their tradition and then he would follow his. It's rather sad that his name now should be abused by a culturally craven and defeatist British state too impotent to rouse itself against the remorseless migrant tide. Nevertheless, this judgment was of some interest to me because, as you know, Priti Patel's plan for large numbers of young male migrants to be housed in perpetuity on military bases is also to be applied to Linton-On-Ouse in North Yorkshire. Here once again from the Linton-On-Ouse campaign is Olga Matthias. Olga, it's always good to see you. This judgment from the High Court is interesting because surely it could also be of application to Linton as well.
I think that's absolutely correct, Mark. One of the things that we've said since the beginning of the campaign is that it would be a far better use of public money if the Home Office accepted that what they were coming up with for the use of former military bases in general, and Linton-On-Ouse specifically, that it's the wrong plan in the wrong place. It would save public money enormously if they just said, OK, we've got it wrong. We have some other plans to deal with asylum seekers entering the country and processing their applications. For instance, the right plan might be to actually start increasing the processing volumes, the throughput of these things, because the number of asylum seekers has been decreasing since 2002, but the backlog has increased, to use a very popular government word, has increased exponentially. And that's clearly because they're not processing. Processing times have taken a huge increase. They are now taking well over 6 months. In the initial FAQ that was issued on the 14th of April regarding Linton-On-Ouse, they said asylum seekers who are housed at the RAF base will be there for a maximum of 180 days. Now, if you go onto the FAQ site, that has been removed completely. And as we've noticed with Napier and the current judicial diktat that says this is unlawful, Priti Patel is the single Home Secretary that has had the most judicial announcements against what she's doing. So they really ought to start looking at the root cause of what this problem is. It's not the number of asylum seekers. In 2020, we had 29,000 asylum seekers enter this country. As I said earlier, in 2002, we had 84,000 enter this country. Why are we not processing them? Why are we spending taxpayers' money on opening huge Amazon warehouse type venues for processing asylum seekers' claims and then actually not processing them? Why are we spending all that money? Why don't we just get the civil servants to actually do their jobs and process the claims?
Well, I suppose because they're all, 90% of them are working from home because of whichever Omicron subvariant is doing the rounds this week. I don't get the feeling there is much energy in the executive, as the phrase used to be. I mean, isn't a lot of this a bit of... here's the problem, Olga, as I think I would see it if I happened to be a North Yorkshire homeowner. This is my village. I bought a house for so many £1,000 and it's now going to be worth a lot less because we've put a destabilising factor in the middle of the village. And there's no real pretense anymore that we've got this brilliant plan to send them to our Commonwealth cousins in Rwanda, but the European Court has nixed that, so we just came up with a plan that doesn't mean anything. We're coming up with more plans that don't mean anything. Isn't it realistically that this is all just kind of some third-rate dinner theatre, and that most of the people who come here are going to be staying, and we're just wanting somewhere to stick them that doesn't cost too much until we give up and they're let loose in the community?
But it does cost a lot, doesn't it, Mark? The fact that they're spending heaven only knows how many thousands on recruitment, on refurbishing, on furniture, on food, on legals, aid, on medical. As well as the announcement today about Napier, yet again being unlawful, we've had an announcement in North Yorkshire that the CCG, the Clinical Commissioning Group for the area, has agreed with the Home Office that there will be a bespoke service for the asylum seekers for healthcare. A premium package will be delivered. There are people who live in North Yorkshire, not just in Linton-On-Ouse, who cannot access NHS dental care, who cannot access a GP service. As I mentioned last week when I was on the show with you, York Hospital, which is a large trust, has had an appalling quality assessment because they do not have enough nurses. And yet, out of a hat, we managed to provide medical services, housing services, legal services, all the things that the Indigenous population cannot access. We managed to find them for asylum seekers instead of actually processing their applications and saying, yes, you can stay, or no, you can't. And bear in mind that 48% of applications get rejected. They then go to appeal.
Yeah.
And about 50% of those get passed on appeal. So let's say, roughly speaking, this is, a bit like Priti Patel's policies, back of a fag packet numbers, 75% of them get approved immediately, or, well, eventually. Why don't we just get them into the population? If we have to accept them, let's just get them processed. Let's just get them adding value to our community.
Well, in other words, you're saying as the entire system is a total joke, why don't we just rubber stamp them through, and then instead of having to have a bespoke medical system, they can have the same crappy system as everybody else, where you don't get to see a GP for 2 years since the COVID got going, and they can then take their chances on real life English life, as opposed to being in this limbo where if they don't get state-of-the-art medical care, some London lefty lawyer will go to the European Court on Human Rights and a judgment will be issued against the British government. Meanwhile, the people who have the misfortune to be actual British subjects are having to put up with a crappy, third-rate, lousy, semi-inert medical system that hasn't actually been working well now for 2.25 years. You've just explained it brilliantly in a nutshell. Let's let everybody in instantly.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Olga. Yeah, if they're all going to get in anyway, let's just rubber stamp them instead of creating facilities for them. Okay, you're in. You're as British as William the Conqueror. You've got the run of the land. Enjoy it because it's decrepit. Thank you very much, Olga. You've explained it perfectly to us.